Welcome to the Outdoor Biz Podcast Adventure Travel Series, where we embark on thrilling journeys and share captivating stories exploring the world of adventure travel. Join me as I share the stories of guides, outfitters, and destinations that will ignite your wanderlust and inspire your next great adventure. Whether it's scaling majestic peaks, diving into turquoise waters, or traversing vast wilderness, we unveil the hidden gems that every outdoor enthusiast dreams of exploring. Let's get after it. Hey, Richard, welcome to the show.
Hey, well, good to be here.
Yeah, good to be talking with you again. It's been a while since we chatted on the podcast, and I ran into you a couple of places at trade shows. But yeah, always enjoy talking to you, and I'm excited to talk about your new book.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to talk about it as well.
Yeah. Let's start with that. The Art of Living Dangerously. It's a collection of true stories, both perilous and awe-inspiring, from the full array of your adventure travel activities. Is there one story that is more perilous than the rest?
It sort of covers 50 years of adventure travel. So I started back in 1973.
Wow.
It's hard to actually even imagine that we were doing these sorts of things. I was in my early 20s when we started the company, and we did our first trips to Ethiopia, where there are a series of extraordinary rivers that flow off the high plateau. It's about an 8,000-foot average elevation plateau where Addis Ababa, the capital, lies, and there are huge rivers that pour off all the compass points. And it seemed like a land of opportunity. I'd been a river guide in the Colorado to the Grand Canyon in my teens, and I just fell in love with rivers, wild rivers, and making passage down rivers. So the opportunity to do some rivers in Ethiopia overwhelmed me, and I made all sorts of. Oh, hang on a second. Can you stop for a second?
Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, Laura, I'm on a podcast. I think we have to do it over now. Oh well, my son's late to school.
Better get on that.
You want to start over or something?
Let's pick up where you were.
We're going to start over now. Almost out the door. Okay.
Let's start. Pick up where you were particularly enamored with rivers.
Okay. So I was fortunate in that I got a job as a river guide on the Colorado River of the Grand Canyon when I was 18 years old.
Wow, cool.
It was a relatively new activity, and they were desperate for people who are willing to guide into these relatively unknown waters. And I jumped at that opportunity and fell madly in love with it. I was in school at university in the winter times, and I painfully waited every day of the winter. It was in Chicago at Northwestern for the moment in the spring where I could hop on the plane and come back out to the Southwest and raft the Grand Canyon. And there was I worked for a company called Hatch River Expedition.
Oh yeah, I remember that company. Yeah,
remember Hatch? Yeah, it was great. It's still around.
Oh, cool.
And it was the original rafting concessionaire in the Colorado River to the Grand Canyon. It was started in 1928.
Wow, I didn't realize it was that old.
Yeah. Buzz Hatch, the founder of it, was really the pioneer of Western river rafting. And he originally operated. He was out of Vernal, Utah, and did first commercial trips down the Green and the Yampa rivers, and then made his way to the Colorado to the Grand Canyon. By 1959, only 100 people had ever been down the Colorado to the Grand Canyon.
Wow.
And by when I started in 1968, there hadn't been that many more. And,
Right.
And it was a brand new, eye-opening experience. And that attracted a lot of extraordinary people,
Yeah, yeah.
including National Geographic. So
Mm-hmm.
they went down the river and had a fantastic time with a rival company to Hatch called Grand Canyon Expeditions.
Mm-hmm.
And they had such a remarkable experience, as anybody would, that they came back and they said, let's do another project. And somebody along the way in their camp said, why don't we do the Omo River in Ethiopia?
Wow.
And I had never heard of the Omo River, but I got a brochure that they had printed up that said, join the river trip of the century, the last great first, the Omo River. And they were selling seats for $3,000.
Who was doing
which
it?
would National Geographic.
Oh, National Geographic's doing it. Okay.
In concert with Grand Canyon Expeditions.
Okay.
And
but had either of those companies had people down that river? It was kind of okay. So
no.
Okay, first descent.
Nobody had ever been down
Okay.
the Omo River, but they had done an aerial,
Yeah.
and they saw that it was very much like the Colorado for the Grand Canyon, although in many ways more layered and more dimensional. Because it had all this African wildlife and
Right.
peoples and gigantic waterfalls spilling off the escarpment. They were wowed by it, and they wanted to do this last great first descent. And I got a copy of the brochure, and I drove up to Kanab, Utah, where the company was based, and met with the owner, Ron Smith. And at this point, this is 1972, I believe. I said, look, I think I'm one of the best guides on the Colorado River. I would love to volunteer to be a guide on this thing.
Yeah.
And he goes, well, yeah, we do have a spot left. And he looked me up and down, and I was still a little on the skinny side back then. And he goes, look, this is a pretty rigorous expedition. It's a 30-day expedition. Why don't you see if you can get yourself in better shape and then come back and we'll see what we can do. So I went back to college, and I spent the next couple of semesters working out, drinking protein shakes, and I buffed up more than I've ever have, I think. And I came back to his office and a few months later and walked in feeling like Rambo or early Arnold Schwarzenegger or something.
Right.
And he goes, wow, you really did a good job of getting in good shape. But I'm sorry I gave the last spot to my brother.
Oh no!
And I'm going, come on,
really,
you can't do that. So at that point, I went to my best friend from high school, John Yost, whose father was the U.S. ambassador to Ethiopia. I'm sorry, vice ambassador to BCM. And he'd been over to Ethiopia on diplomatic favor a couple of times, and he was also equally entranced. It's the Tibet of Africa.
Yeah.
And I said, look, why don't we just do this on our own? And we had no monies, but we had a vague idea that you get sponsors for expeditions. So we started a letter writing campaign, and we actually found some sponsors. We got a rafting company, Holcomb Industries, to contribute rafts. We had an oar company. We had a life jacket company that sponsored us. And we even got a magazine called Saga Magazine, which was kind of a men's magazine back then. And they gave us film and said, look, we'd love to publish it. No advance monies or anything, but if it works out, we'll publish it.
If you come back, we'll publish it.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
With stories.
Yeah.
So we figured out how to get over to Africa. We used the diplomatic pouch to ship the gear, so that didn't cost us anything. And we got on the river, and we're 4 months ahead of Geographic.
Really? In front of them? Okay.
Yeah. So, and we went down the river, And it was, as advertised, extraordinary. It was just amazing.
I bet beautiful and challenging at the same time.
Yes, yeah,
Wow.
very much the sort of Colorado of Africa, but in many ways just a richer experience. And the people and the massive wildlife were extraordinary. A lot of crocodiles, hippos, or 4,000 hippos or so.
Oh my God!
And they'd pop up under the boats and lift the boats a couple inches in the air and try to bite their way, to air. But the crocodiles were the things that we feared the most because their instinct is predation. They're like perfect killing machines, supposedly evolved from the primordial soup 150 million years ago, and really haven't changed much. They're the closest living relatives to the dinosaurs, and they they love meat.
Did they had? But humans were there, right? There were natives there, right?
Yes.
So they knew humans. You weren't the first humans, so they were familiar with flailing arms and legs and a head. They knew what that was about.
They're absolutely familiar with eating humans, and even today, more people die from crocodiles than any other, all other animals combined.
I didn't know.
You go down to the river to fetch water, and they're very stealthy. They will hang out they have these little turreted eyes, and they can sort of disguise themselves.
They're pretty good at that.
In the somewhat muddy water, and you don't even see them, and suddenly they snap their tails, and they knock you in the water, and then they'll grab a limb or something, and they'll spin until they loose something from you, a leg or whatever, and then they rinse and repeat, and they will bury everything in an underwater cave and let it decompose to smaller pieces because they have very tiny gullets.
Interesting.
And they'll feed on that for a while.
Wow.
Anyway, you're asking what was a dangerous moment.
Yeah.
We had another friend of mine on the trip, a doctor, who was also an aspiring filmmaker. He had a Super 8 camera, and we were, close to 3 weeks down the river, and he'd never captured a good shot of a crocodile because we used the system we call croc rocks, where every morning we'd fill up the boats with hand-sized rocks, and then crocodiles would slither off the shore, and they'd swim towards us, sort of motorboat towards us, and we'd toss rocks at them.
Yeah, smart.
And they're very skittish. And we'd get close to them and hit them, and they would dive underwater and leave us alone. So it was frustrating, for George, because he really wanted to prove that we were in Africa.
Right.
So he said, "Okay, let's not throw rocks on the next crocodile charge." And sure enough, we withheld, and he had his camera operating this huge croc motored towards him. And then, he kept filming as the croc got to within inches and opened up its jaw and wrapped it around the bow of the boat. And George jumped on the oars at that point and started, screaming and rowing downstream, dragging this 2,000-pound crocodile that was kind of shaking the boat like a dog with a rag or something.
And their teeth were sharp. They could have punctured the boat, right?
They did. Well, he absolutely punctured it.
Okay, yeah.
So it blew out the. The boats are 6-chambered. So if you had more than one crocodile attacking, you could sink the boat. But the boat continued to float, and I was right behind him. I tried to catch up with him, but he was hydroplaning. He was rowing so fast, dragging this huge crocodile. And finally, his wife, Diane Fuller, who was a nurse, grabbed one of the metal buckets and leapt to the back of the boat where the crocodile was hooked. They have one-dimensional jaws, which means they can shut them like an iron trap,
Mm.
but they have a difficult time opening.
Oh, interesting.
So in theory, you can hold a crocodile's jaws shut with your hands. Never tested that
Yeah,
theory,
who wants to test that, right?
but she grabbed this bucket and she started whacking the thing over her on its head with this metal bucket. Really unbelievably brave. I'm watching this
No
thing
kidding.
as I'm rolling downstream, going, "What the?"
Yeah, right. Are you nuts?
And finally the crocodile rips itself off, and and sinks away.
Huh.
And George got his footage, and we spent the next 2 days patching up the boat.
Yeah, I was gonna say you had bunches in the boat.
It was a hell of a start. And
that was day one.
Yeah. And to conclude the whole thing, we finished this trip. The lower Omo was filled with these tribes. The Bodhi and the Mercy are two of the preeminent ones who claimed at the time that they had never seen white skin. That this was first contact.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And certainly there was no written account of anybody encountering these tribal people. So there's a series of extraordinary encounters there, and photography and dealing with the unknowns of people are going. Many of them were just frightened. The women and children would scream and run away, and the men would come down with their spears, and they were all naked except for tree bark that they had pounded into rudimentary loincloth, and massive scarification and lip plates. You've seen the lip plates they have. It was such an encounter, and we photographed everything. And I got back and went to Geographic, and I had a carousel of our slides. And I remember walking in into the receptionist, and I said, I'd like to meet with Bill Graves, who was the editor for the project.
Mm-hmm.
And she goes, "Well, do you have an appointment?" I go, "No." She said, "Well, you have to have an appointment." I said, "Well, can you just call him and tell him that I just got back from the Omo?" And so she did, and he rushes downstairs, takes me into the elevator up to a conference room, where all the key editors, photo editors, and the publisher, everybody shows up at this conference room, and I go through the carousel, and I show them
fascinating
that we'd done this thing. And at one point, somebody goes, "How much did it cost?" Because they were spending, I don't know, several $100,000 on this project. It'd be much more in today's dollars.
Yeah, right.
But we figured that we did the entire thing for $150 each.
Wow.
Back then.
God. A lot of money back then, though. Yeah.
Well, we were just students. We didn't have much. And their jaws dropped. And I said, "Look, you're happy. I'm happy to join your expedition and show you what we learned, or you can use my photos." I'm not a very good photographer, but they escorted me to the door and said, "Well, we'll call you."
Uh-oh.
And
really?
I never heard from them.
Really?
But I did. Somebody sent me an account of the guy who was supposed to write their article. I have it on my desk even, where they chose the wrong time of year to go. They went in high water. We had gone in low.
Mm-hmm.
And there's almost no wildlife in high water because they don't need to go down to the river.
Right.
And the tribes, the villages go to the highlands during the wet season. And the rapids were big. They had Alan Root, who was their most famous African photographer at the time, was the assigned photographer. And they had a capsize in one of these big rapids, and they lost all his camera gear.
Oh, my God. So they had no footage. Oh, geez.
So the story never ran. And it took years for Geographic to talk to me again.
Wow, that's interesting.
Finally, 30 years later, so back with my company, we ended up being the outfitter for Nat Geographic Adventures, and ran those for 10 years. So all was patched up. But
so was that first ascent ever published anywhere? I don't remember seeing. I'm sure I don't remember seeing it.
Well, yes.
Okay.
Well, first of all, we did publish in Saga magazine.
Okay.
And that account is in the book.
Okay, cool.
So it's there. But also, I'm sure you know or heard of Larry Burke, who is the publisher of Outside magazine. He sold it a couple of years ago, but he started Mariah magazine, which was his predecessor to Outside, and we were the cover story for the first Mariah Outside magazine. So that's sort of legendary as well.
Yeah.
And there have been a lot of accounts of the Omo River, and no reference.
That's amazing. That's
what
amazing.
happened. So
yeah.
So that's one of many, many, many stories that are in the art of living dangerously.
Well,
it's not a science; it's an art. So.
That's true. It's not a science. And there's a lot of stories like that, right? Because when you guys were doing this back in the day, you were first on. I mean, how many first ascents do you have under your belt? Got to be a lot.
Well, I have about 35 under my belt.
Yeah.
John Yost, my high school friend and partner, has gone way beyond that. He's continuing to do first ascents, always on the outlook. So I truly admire, and I join him every now and then.
Yeah,
I joined him. We did some first ascents in Laos a couple years ago, and then we went to Guatemala and did some first ascents.
Very cool.
So I'll join him, but he certainly holds the record. And if you count all the Sobek trips, I did a book called Lost River, and in the back there's a kind of a catalog of all the first ascents that we'd done to that point, and that book was published in the 90s.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think I have that book. Yeah.
So I think there, it depends on how you count it, but if you include the various Sobek guides, because everybody was fired up about doing first ascents, you could stretch it and say about 200 first ascents have been made with some sort of Sobek participation. Most of them led as Sobek trips.
Yeah.
But
and what year was Sobek started? Sorry.
1973. 1973.
Okay. Yeah. Wow.
50 years ago last year. Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing. Yeah.
It is.
And so that was really, you guys pioneered the adventure travel concept, really. I mean, there was really, some folks were doing some rivers and things, but no folks were doing treks or anything like that. Or how did that come about?
Yeah, it's so interesting, the sort of origins of adventure travel. When we first decided that, rather than get serious about life and go to law school or something, right. We said, what we've discovered is so extraordinary. How can we turn our backs on it?
Yeah.
So we decided to incorporate and hang a shingle out, and we, my other partner, George Wendt, who owned Oars, I moved to Angels Camp, and we worked out of his basement, had a single light bulb and a couple of manual typewriters, and we started sending out brochures and corresponding, and I started writing articles, which really helped.
Yeah.
And we got the thing amazingly off the ground. And, as it started to fuel itself, it became kind of a flywheel. We would use any monies that we made from an expedition to finance the next expedition.
Right.
We were just running around the world, doing first ascents. It was amazing.
Was it mostly river trips, or were there any treks at that point?
Yeah,
mostly river trips.
For the first probably 10 years. It was almost all rivers.
Okay.
Simultaneously, mountain travel, which was started by Leah LeBon.
Oh, right.
Used to with Thomas Cook. And with Thomas Cook, he had taken one of the first groups to Nepal um, to trek to. I'm not even sure where the first trek was, but somewhere in the Himalayas, and that was a new concept. There was a recognition that the Sherpa supported all the climbing expeditions, and it was a heady time in the 50s.
Right.
53, Everest was summited by Norgay and Hillary, and all these Sherpas were carrying loads and were adept at high altitude, and somebody came up with the idea, Thomas Cook, that why not employ these Sherpas to allow people to hike to some of the base camps, and it started this whole construct. So mountain travel was doing treks, we were doing rivers.
Gotcha.
But both simultaneously said, well, let's expand our horizons. So we started offering treks, and then sailing trips and diving trips, ballooning trips. We said anything that's active and outdoors, biking trips, we would like to offer. So we started to publish these beautiful catalogs.
Yeah, I remember drooling over many of those as a young lad.
Yeah. I spent months every year creating those catalogs.
Yeah, beautiful catalogs.
Dream books, and and I think we were the first, and then Mountain Travel started to just do the same thing, and they sort of moved into into offering some rivers as well. I know Sobek did the first commercial trip to Antarctica in the 70s.
Wow.
We started doing, lots of very unusual things and places. So we offered Easter Island before it was well known, and we had the first trips to Cuba. In 1979, we got into Cuba, and in the about 77, I think it was, I took the first American group to China, which was amazing. Because after Mao Zedong in the late 40s, China had been shut off to the rest of the world, and they decided to dip their toes into tourism. And they called Ethiopian Airlines, which had gone through a communist-style revolution led by Mengistu Haile Mariam, a colonel who fashioned himself the Mao Zedong of Africa. And so Ethiopia was the only exterior carrier. So they approached Ethiopian Airlines and they said, look, we want to bring a group in. Can you recommend an outfitter? And they recommended me. So I did a mailing. Back then everything was by mail.
Right.
And had an envelope with a big red banner on it, said Red Alert. I mailed it out, and immediately we got, I think about 30 people who signed up. And so I led this trip to mainland China in the 77, I think it was. And it was, again, that was another boggling experience.
Yeah, right. From China. It's like nobody wanted to touch China.
Well, a lot of people wanted to touch it, but nobody had been allowed it. So it was
That's true.
It was pretty awesome to go through the country and see how they were dealing with the world at that moment in time.
Yeah.
So anyway, yes, we were before Sobek and Mountain Travel. There were no companies in the U.S. offering global adventures. There were, people that offered. Sierra Club offered hikes.
Yeah, local mountain guides.
Sierras,
Sierra Club, right? Yeah, ski trips.
There were some more, ski trips, river trips were starting to crop up. But as far as international adventure travel, we were the first two companies based in the U.S. And and the zeitgeist was right. So we kind of hit the the right moment.
Timing was perfect. Yeah. When did the two companies join? What year was that?
1981.
Okay.
I'm sorry, let's say 81. 1991.
91. So about 20 years separate of one another, and then you joined.
Yes. Yeah, we became fierce rivals for a long time. And 91 was, I think I have the dates correct here. 91 was when we had the first Gulf War. And it was a terrible time for both of our companies, in that the State Department issued a warning to Americans not to travel overseas. And both of us had extended ourselves. We were very big in the Galapagos back then, and still are. But in order to operate in the Galapagos, there are no foreign boats allowed. You have to use an Ecuadorian boats, and our program was pretty robust. So you have to pay a year in advance for these boats, and they don't come cheap. So we had put all the monies down with full expectations that we were going to, do good business. But when things shut down, suddenly we were left, with a big hole. And it turned out Mountain Travel had the same issue. They had decided they wanted to build a cruise boat to take people to Antarctica, and they had spent a fortune. Unfortunately, they'd used some of the clients' deposits to help build this boat. Right. And during this time frame, the boat company went bankrupt. MT Sobek was left hanging. So even though we'd been fierce rivals for years, I gave the CEO a call. I had to swallow my pride. A guy named Dick McGowan back then, and said, "Look, would you consider talking about a merger?" We were desperate, and I was shocked when he said, "Yeah, come on over." So we went over and we hammered it out. It took several months, but the two companies were and are a lot healthier. As a result of that.
That was a smart move. But they were in the Bay Area too, weren't they?
Yes. So that worked out fairly well.
You could literally go over,
At that point, Sobek had two offices. We had one in the Angels Camp, which was our traditional office, which we shared with Oars. And the other one we opened up on Lake Merritt in Oakland, which would give us easier access to the airport and and talent, et cetera, et cetera. So we had two. Yost was running the Angels Camp. I was running the Oakland one. So it was easy. Mountain Travel was based in Albany, which is
close,
close to Berkeley.
I remember as a young river guide in the Kern, I wanted to work for Sobek at Angels Camp so bad. Never did. I don't even think I ever applied. I was too busy on the Kern. It was so much fun. But, it was, those are crazy days.
It was. I mean, it's hard to imagine that any of that stuff could happen today.
That's true. Yeah. Well, the world is, unfortunately, it seems like most of it has been explored. That's one thing.
No, that's not true.
Not all of it, but a lot of it.
Yeah.
And, same political challenges. Yeah. Hey, you love to learn, right? You're probably a lifelong learner like me. New photography techniques, new tools like AI. I know, it's fun and keeps the creative juices flowing. I just purchased a course on AI from Creative Live the other day. I'm always looking for tools and methods to streamline my production process for the Outdoor Biz podcast. And Creative Live has an amazing selection of live and on-air classes. Over 1,500 curated classes in photography and video, money and life, craft and maker, art and design, and music and audio. There's something for everyone. And new classes added every month. I've watched many of their on-air broadcasts for free and then purchased the class later because it was so good. Go to ricksays.com/creativelive and learn something new today. That's www.ricksays.com/creativelive. And drop me an email and tell me what course you chose. Maybe I'll check it out too. Let's get back to the show. So that's a good segue into these days as you guys continue to grow and continue to look for new places. How do you go about designing, and developing new itineraries? Who's the product development team?
Well, we have a series of program directors for each of the major destinations, and everybody's encouraged to seek out new possibilities. And we had sort of a loose formula that we would try to get 20% new product every year.
Oh wow!
And then drop the places that weren't doing that well. And there are no shortage of new destinations to go to.
Yeah.
In fact, the book talks a lot about some of the first that I was involved in. I took the first group to North Korea, which again was an astonishing experience.
Yeah.
And then also took the first group into Libya, to Iran, and to Saudi Arabia before they opened it up to tourism.
I think that trip I did with Ripley and Stan and Kate Bohr on the Carnali was one of the early Carnali trips.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
So the whole conceit of the company pre and post merger was to explore and to pioneer. And I've continued it. I went to Angola and did a first trip, took the helicopter tour of the highlands of Angola.
Cool.
Last year, which was amazing. They had a 30-year civil war, which had disallowed anybody to visit, and their undeveloped far eastern highlands had never been touched by outsiders. So it was amazing to do that. And then I also last year did a trip to Sudan, which is now absolutely closed.
Yeah, I'll bet.
The foreign visitation. But we continue to pore over the map and try to color in new places.
See what opens up. Yeah. It's interesting to go to these places when they are still under, not military control, but there's a heavy military influence. When I went over to do the trek with Eka through the Caucasus, it was that way. We weren't in Russia, but we were on the border, and the Russian guards were there, and you could see the guardhouses. And
you were in Georgia?
In Georgia, yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of rivers there that we've run.
Oh, yeah.
The Rioni, I don't know if you know that one.
No.
Yeah, spent a lot of time in Georgia. It is spectacular.
Beautiful place.
There's that one military road, which you were probably on, which connects Russia to Georgia, which is always clogged up. And
we didn't see too many. I'm not sure what trek we did, but it was pretty. Didn't see too many people. There was a stream flowing most of the way, but I remember a couple places seeing the Russian guards there, and this was, this was what, maybe 10 years ago now, and it was not like it is today. I mean, today you might not be able to go there. I think it's all under the Russians have had their way with Tbilisi, and it's kind of challenging.
Well, no, you can go there. I was just there.
Oh, were you? Oh, okay, good.
We've been doing a number of projects there, and we sell Georgia. At the moment, things are fine. 20% of Georgia is occupied by Russia, but Tbilisi's fine.
Good. That's good. Yeah.
And the wine country, and
the wine country,
all the way to the border.
Yeah.
The beautiful mountain huts and
it's a cool place. Yeah.
And hotels and stuff you can stay at.
Yeah. I don't think Eka's doing treks anymore. I think she's focused on her winery with her husband. Her husband was a big kayaker.
She's
name.
married to Olaf.
Olaf, that's it. Yeah.
Olaf Malver.
Yeah.
And he gives me credit for their meeting because there was this is probably a dozen years ago, there was a conference I was asked to speak at, and at the moment at the time I had a conflict, I couldn't go, so I asked Olaf. He was based out of our office. I said, look, could you could you cover for me? And he went. I forgot what it was, like a developing world a tourism conference, and he went and met his soon to be Georgian wife.
Yeah.
They're doing great.
They're doing great. Yeah, we had dinner at their house. We were there. For great people. Yeah, good wine too. They're making some good wine.
Yeah, great wine.
Yeah,
I've got some of my wine rack here.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. So, with the growing emphasis on sustainable and responsible tourism, how does Sobek incorporate those principles into your operations and trips? You've probably done that all along, actually.
We have done it all along. I mean, that's been part of our philosophy and practicing since the beginning. For multiple reasons. One is even economic, which is a different way to talk about ecotourism. But our currency is wild places,
right?
And if for whatever reasons we were conducting trips that in any way compromised the integrity of a destination, then we could no longer really offer it in good conscience. So we always have small groups. Have never really varied from that, and we have built in to our standards and practices that everything has to be left as pristine as found, and then the other tenets of ecotourism we've also always advocated and practiced, including hiring local guides and interpreters, making sure that our clients are able to interact with locals, sometimes villagers, on a two-way basis. So, much of the idea was that we were the sort of anti-resort ideation, so that you could not be the mobile rich exacting yourself on the inert poor, but you could come and meet on their grounds, on their terms, and shake hands, touch one another,
right,
and listen to one another and learn from one another, which I think is a very noble concept. I think it helps understanding and appreciation in a way that few other things can. I mean, everything else is academic, but when you actually see, a family, and whether it be North Korea or Yemen or or Angola or something, where people are living in the same, with the same hopes and dreams and aspirations, et cetera, that we have, you can't help but feel the commonality and the connection.
Right.
Everybody wants their children to be healthy and to be educated and to have a better life. And it's in New Guinea. It's the same as it is in Los Angeles. So
that's what I enjoyed on a couple of the trips that I went on with Ripley and Stan and a couple of other ones is you make your way to wherever the destination of the river is. There's usually a trek involved. And you get to meet the locals and go into their huts and share a meal with them if you choose. And that's just really, the world over, we're all people. We're all the same. We just have different cultures and different, economic situations and all these things. But at the end of the day, you can sit down and have a cup of tea with somebody or coffee, and they have a family. They have kids that they're trying to keep under control and get off to school or whatever it is. So that's
absolutely
huge. Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
It's an eye opener, and it's also a consciousness changer. And it's also an agent for understanding. So, I think what we do is, and obviously I have vested interest in expressing this, but I do think what we offer, as far as experiences go, can be transformative, and it can be vital, and it can be important. So I'm in many ways proud of what we've done and continue to do. One tiny example, we did the first descent of the Zambezi River, which runs between Zambia and Zimbabwe, and it's now become extremely popular activity in Southern Africa. I think the most popular adventure in the lower latitudes of Africa.
Yeah. That's one of the most popular river adventures globally, isn't it? I mean, it always seems like people. Yeah, it's
hugely popular. It's great.
It comes up. Yeah.
Yeah, and when we did it, I mean, it was just fresh after.
Still wild, right?
Well, it was very wild, and it was right after Zimbabwe had emerged from white minority ruled Rhodesia, and it became black majority ruled Zimbabwe, and there had been a civil war that had gone on for a dozen years. So the river was littered with landmines, and we had to have sappers with us who would jump on a beach and sweep it before we could even get off and take a leak. Do a lunch. But anyway, we the villages on the Zambian side, along the Zambezi, were dirt poor as you could get, and they didn't have clinics, they didn't have schools. It was just subsistence, and we needed bodies to what they call high siding, basically weight, because these are big rapids, big, huge waves, and so we would hire some of these locals to be high siders, they were called, and their job was to throw. Oh yeah,
wow!
Their job was to throw their bodies, on the high side of a boat.
Yeah, right.
And they were great at it. So we decided to bring a few of them over to Angel's Camp and put them through a course on how to be a guide for the summer. And we did, and brought them back. Simon and Alik were the two key ones, and they in turn started training other villagers. And now the operation is almost entirely run by locals.
Wow, cool.
And it's entirely changed the economy of Livingston, Zambia, and the surrounding villages, because there are many people who were dirt poor but are now living a much higher quality of life as a result of learning how to be a guide. And they're exceptional. They're really great guides.
Yeah,
and now there are roads that have been built with the monies that they've made, and schools and clinics. Everything about their universe has improved, I think, because of our presence, and on our leaning forward and reaching out and seeing an opportunity for them. And I'm proud of that. So,
you should be. Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah. Change the whole culture. I'm kind of spitballing around the questions here. Sorry.
Sure.
So every business faces challenges over the year. Can you share over the decades like you guys have been around? Can you share some of the major challenges Sobek has encountered and how you've overcome them?
Well, we talked about one, which was during the first Gulf War. That was
that's probably, has that happened a few times with the political machinations going on around the world? I mean, somewhere you have a great trip and great things going on, and all of a sudden they're at war and you can't go.
That happens a lot. So,
unfortunately, yeah.
I mean, look, we used to do a lot of trips to China. We're no longer doing any trips to China. We used to do river trips all over Russia, and so
right.
And that's none of those are possible at the moment. So yes, but one of the advantages we discovered early on was to be, as we were a sort of a global adventure travel company, that as one destination suffered and became inaccessible for whatever period of time, others would pop up, or we could, people would be keen to try something different or new for them. So it sustained us through the political machinations. But there were economic periods that that were very challenging for us.
Right.
And of course, COVID,
Right.
which was, probably the biggest disruption, and which saw a lot of travel companies go under. And we were able to pivot, and it made all the difference. And we were always internationally focused, and we had a few river permits in the U.S., the Middle Fork and Cataract Canyon, some rivers in Alaska. But we, during COVID, recognized that people still wanted to travel, even though overseas was off limits.
Right.
So we invested heavily in creating more North American product. So we bought some vans, and we got permissions to do almost all the national parks in the West.
Wow, nice.
And if you see our current catalog, you'll see that there's a whole robust section, for North America. And people still wanted to travel, and they recognized that they wanted to be outside if they're traveling. They wanted to be with a pod or their family, and to do a river trip or do a hike in a national park was a viable alternative. So we did quite well with those offerings, during COVID. We're still offering all of that product that we put
I'll
together.
bet that, once you start some of that stuff, it's the demand is there, so it never goes away, or rarely goes away.
Yeah. So,
that's good. Yeah.
So it's a big part of the mix now.
Yeah. What trends do you see emerging in the adventure travel sector? In addition to like some of the wine tasting and some of the trekking, is there anything on the horizon that you're working on now? Or
well, we continue to promote and seek out new destinations and activities. After these decades, adventure travel is very much baked into the travel mindset.
Yeah, it's a category these days for not only the providers of the trips, but the Eagle Creeks of the world who make the gear and all those things.
Yeah, I love Eagle Creek.
Yeah, they're great.
So, what's the trend? Well, I think a trend that started a long time ago was trying to make adventure travel more accessible, meaning that if there's some way to get somebody who has a gut reaction against active outdoor wilderness travel, to somehow convince them in an easy way to step into it and experience it, then that person in likelihood will not only enjoy the experience, but will invest in doing something a little bit more challenging, maybe further away.
Once you get hooked, you always want to do more.
You get hooked.
That's right.
You're right. It's like a drug.
That's right.
Although the first one's not free, though.
Yeah, right.
So the North American program has proved very propitious for us in that it makes it easy for families and others with a relatively low cost investment to try it out. And then it's a customer lifetime value proposition.
Right.
If they like it, and they usually do, then they'll come to us to try something a little bit bolder. Let's go on a trek in Europe, let's say.
Right.
Let's do the Tour de Mont Blanc, or a walk through Tuscany.
Right.
And then then they often will graduate to, let's do a safari. Let's go to the Galapagos. So it's been a good strategy, and I think it continues. Adventure travel, broadly defined, touches, I think, 1 in 10 Americans in some fashion. And I think that there are certainly a lot more companies now.
Yeah,
and a lot more offerings.
Right. Yeah, right.
But people, are aware and inspired, and they want to try it out, in a low risk situation, and then hopefully graduate.
Well, and I think the other
So,
thing about adventure travel, and you guys have had a lot to do with this, is it doesn't always have to be a thrilling river trip for an adventure,
oh, no,
right? One person's adventure is to go wine tasting, and another person's adventure is to go Class 5 whitewater. So it's a variety of things.
absolutely. It is very much a relative and a personal thing. So if you are somebody who's never been outdoors in your life,
Right.
and you decide to camp out in your backyard
Yeah.
for the first time,
Yeah.
that's an adventure.
Yeah.
It's getting beyond the comfort zone. It's when you make discoveries. It's when you learn about yourself and the world. When you push your personal boundaries and try something that's a little bit different.
Yeah.
And that's our message.
Yeah, that's kind of your motto.
Give it a try.
Right. Yeah. Try it out. Yeah. What does the future hold for you guys? You got any exciting developments coming up you can talk about?
Well, yeah. We're trying new things all the time. I just
Yeah, it seems
in
like
November, I did a led a trip that may not be repeated, where we used helicopters out of Kathmandu to visit all of the 8,000 meter peaks.
Oh wow!
In Nepal. So we flew to the base camps of Everest and Manaslu and Kanchenjunga. It was an extraordinary experience. A very expensive one.
Oh yeah, it's a spendy one.
But
right?
It was a way, yeah. And I felt a little bit guilty sometimes when we'd land at a base camp and somebody had spent 2 weeks hiking there, burning it.
Right.
I felt guilty, but only for a minute because it was a great way to see and experience. I don't know that that's going to be something that continues, but it was quite extraordinary. So we're always looking for new places and new ways to experience the world. And that's been part of our mission from the beginning, and I don't think that's going to change.
That's a great thing about getting your catalog. It's just like when you were a kid, you always got the Sears toy catalog to look at, right? You kind of dreamed at that. Or Nat Geographic, yeah. Now you get the Sobek catalog and Nat Geographic, and just makes you think of all the other places that are still left to go. I mean, for someone like us who've adventured a lot, there's still we haven't seen everything. You've seen a lot, but I haven't seen as much. But still, there's so many places to go and do and see. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
We're getting near to the end here. How do you have a favorite book? Is there just of all the adventure books and books you've read, do you have a favorite one?
Boy, I have many.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I'm a sort of a fan of exploration literature.
What are you reading now in that genre? Anything?
Yeah, I just came back from Uganda, which was my first trip to Uganda just last month. And I wanted to go there because I've long been a fan of what they called the golden age of exploration, which was the mid 19th century, where Richard Burton, John Speke, David Livingstone, Henry Morton Stanley, James Bruce, and others were all, Mungo Park even, were all running around trying to find the source of the great rivers. Mungo Park was the Niger, and the rest were the Nile. That was the great geographic quest, and that's always fascinated me. I'm currently reading a novel called The Romantic by William Boyd, where he came across an account of a gentleman who lived during that era and was in his 80s and was sitting down to write his autobiography, and he died. So,
wow!
And he influenced Burton and Speke. So William Boyd decided to fill in the blanks of his life and write a novel based on what he thinks might have happened. His theory at the beginning is that everybody's life is really a novel.
Yeah,
so
right.
Why not do it?
Yeah.
But before that, I remember reading River of the Gods by Candace Millard,
Mm-hmm.
which is a great book on the search for the source of the Nile. The Devil Drives is another great one, which is primarily a hagiography of Richard Burton. And then one of my favorites was To the Heart of the Nile by Pat Shipman,
Mm-hmm.
because it's all about Sam and Florence Baker.
Hmm.
And it's a very intriguing story. I'd
I'll
love
have to
to
get
buy
that. I haven't
buy
read
the
that.
film rights. Oh, it's
Oh, there you
fantastic.
go. Yeah, good idea.
Because she was sold in the slave market
Wow.
in Bulgaria, and she was a teenager, and Sam Baker was on a hunting trip down the Danube and stopped in at this marketplace and saw her and fell instantly in love with her.
Hmm.
And he bid for her, but he lost. So Arab Pasha got him. So he went back stage and he stole her. And he took her to Africa, and they both fell madly in love.
Wow.
And they spent the next 30 years exploring Africa together, madly in love. And they discovered, some people say she was really the one who discovered it, Murchison Falls, which is the great waterfall that begins the Nile. It's right at Lake Albert in Uganda. The most powerful waterfall in the world, they claim. So, it was thrilling for me to actually be in Murchison Falls and see this place that I'd always read about. But she was a hero. She went on to become Lady Florence Baker, even though it was Victorian England, and the Queen, was sort of initially against her being granted the title of lady, but she did so much and discovered so much and outlived her husband, and she ended up, as a woman of note.
Well, I'll have to pick that one up. That sounds like a great book.
It's a great story.
Yeah. Mine has always been Endurance, the classic adventure travel story. Yeah, that's where the name for this podcast came from. Bold adventures, inspiring returns from Shackleton's ad that he put in the paper, trying to get get guys. I forget exactly what it said, but
right, they must be able to sing and dance and have a good sense of humor.
Low pay, return not guaranteed.
Right, not guaranteed. Yeah. I've heard people say that they think that ad is apocryphal. I don't know.
Oh, really? Interesting. Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me. Yeah.
Be curious to see if it actually existed. But
anyway, find the original somewhere.
It's a great concept.
Yeah, it's a classic. Yeah.
And apparently he had no problem recruiting talent.
Yeah.
And
he had folks on that trip, that's for sure.
And they all survived.
Yeah.
So
that was my my trip with you guys to Antarctica. Ripley hooked me up on that trip with Jonathan Chester.
Oh, good.
And
he's great.
I'm hoping to get him on the show when he comes back. He's down there right now, I think.
I think he's back.
Oh, is he? Okay, I'll have to reach out to him again.
So the season's over.
Gotcha.
He was in the last trip, and Jonathan, he'd be great for you. I put together a trip for Bill Gates and his son and his father several years ago, which is a wild trip.
Bet.
Lots of stories out of that, but I hired Jonathan to sort of lead that trip.
He's great.
He was great. And you can ask him about Bill Gates and get some inside stories.
That'll be a good story. Yeah. Do you have a favorite piece of gear under $100 that you always take with you? It's always in your bag.
I saw that in your in your questions, and I was thinking about that. First of all, $100 isn't what it used to be.
I know. I might have to change that, but
yeah. But the one thing I always do carry is a moleskin notebook.
Oh yeah.
They can be $30 or more at this point. I love the fact that supposedly Hemingway and Bruce Chatwin and others used moleskin notebooks to keep their journals, and ever since they became available, I don't know how many decades ago now, I've preferenced them, and we'll take them anytime I'm traveling, and then that's where I get the material to do these books and articles.
Oh, cool! That's smart.
So, it's great because you can quickly write down a piece of dialogue you overhear, or an observation. they're handy,
Yeah.
easy to use.
Mm-hmm.
They all have a little envelope in the back where you can put business cards.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah, I use those a lot too. Yeah.
yeah, so I love the moleskins.
Yeah. The smaller ones you can stick them in your back pocket even if you're out
Yes.
and about. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I love
Yep.
them.
So
That's a good one. And how can people reach out to you if they want to follow up, or obviously they can contact Sobek to go on one of the trips?
yes, yeah, it's easy. It's easy to get hold of me. You can just Google. There's a lot.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
But I have a website, and you can get hold of me through Sobek or directly. So
Cool.
yeah, I would love to hear from anybody.
Okay. Well, we'll put links to that stuff in the show notes. Yeah. And I look forward to seeing you again one of these days. I'm not sure when. Are you going to go to the Outdoor Writers Conference?
Is this the one that's down in Alabama or something?
Yeah, is that where it is? I forget. Yeah, it's no, it's in El Paso this year. It was in Alabama last year.
Okay, I missed that one.
Yeah,
I did the two. I did the one that was in Wyoming.
Yeah, mm-hmm.
Which I thought was great.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I spoke at that, and then I did the one that was up in Vermont.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So there's two. I've basically said that I'll go to any of them as a speaker. So
yeah.
And I've heard that that they would like to invite me back at some point. So I'd love to do that.
Yeah, I'll talk to Ches. I don't think I'm speaking in El Paso this year. I don't remember, but definitely going to go. I'm just going to go for the food.
That's great.
Yeah. Well, it's been great talking to you.
As always.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing you again soon at one of these conferences, and maybe get on another venture one day.
That'd be great.
All right.
Fantastic.
Yeah, thanks, Richard.
Sure.
Thank you for joining us on another episode of the Outdoor Biz Podcast. Be sure to visit our website, theoutdoorbizpodcast.com, where you'll find show notes with links to everything we talked about and more. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss a single episode. And while you're at it, if you found value in this show, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes, or spread the word and tell a friend. That would really help us out too. Be sure to tune in every week, and thanks again for listening to the Outdoor Biz Podcast with Rick Sayes.